Okay, so we are going to talk about doing a tubular cast on, and I just thought I would show you a quick example as to why we want to use this for a hat. So tubular cast-ons give this really beautiful edge where it looks like the stitches simply cascade over one side to the other. It also gives a little bit of a double knit look. It's just really, really pretty. There are lots of ways of accomplishing this. I'm going to show you my favorite way that I think is the easiest, but of course, always feel free to look at others. I just want to show you a quick comparison. Get this on down. What the edge looks like compared to like a long tail cast on. So, I'm a fan of the long tail cast on. I use it a lot because I'm also a super lazy knitter, but it does leave this sort of braid at the bottom. So for a 1x1 ribbing, this is truly my favorite cast on. It's not super hard. It takes, just a little bit of a minute to do. And so it's worth giving a try. Okay, normally, we're going to do a provisional cast on in sort of the same way that they're often done, right? So with a crochet hook, your needle, and waste yarn. Now, typically when this is going to be my waste yarn, this is my working yarn. And typically when you do a provisional cast on, you use a yarn that is about the same weight, or, really you just want as close as possible. In this case, for the provisional cast on, because you're only casting on half the number of stitches that you will use, it's better to go bigger. So this is a DK weight and this is a heavy worsted. So we've gone up the size and in about really gone up almost 2 sizes given the weight difference between these. All right, you're going to make a slip knot the way you normally would make a slip knot, however that is, and that slip knot is going to live on the crochet hook. So you'll then grab your working needle and here it is. The yarn sits behind the needle, the crochet sits in front of the needle. And you are literally crocheting around the needle, launching all of those stitches. This is not a challenging crochet. If you have never crocheted before, you can still do this. Tensioning might take you a second, but other than that, it won't matter. Again, you're going to be casting on half the number of stitches. Since right now, it doesn't really matter. I'm just doing a demonstration. I'm just going to cast them on. And of course, we're doing this for in the round because the hats and the cowls for local yarn shop day, have it your way, hats and cowls are in the round. And the little sample I first showed you is flat. And there's just a tiny difference in sort of dealing with that. Okay, so once you have all of the stitches on there that you want, right, you'll do your last stitch. Now your yarn is in front of the needle and you'll just keep it there because now I'm just going to chain a couple of stitches, 3, 4, 5, whatever, down, cut my yarn, and then pull that through. And so this is what it's going to look like. So you have the area that's chained and you have the tail that's just by itself. The chain is where you're going to start. And I like to do this for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you start right here, then when we're all done and we're going to take off the waste yarn, you can just snip this and easily peel back. If you pull it out from this direction, you have to do a whole lot more work. So by having the chain here, it tells me very, very clearly where I need to start and when I'm done, where I need to pull out from. So that is the why behind that. Move this guy out of the way. Okay, so we've cast on half the number of stitches that are required for our project. And then what we're going to be doing is every stitch will be worked, and then in between the 2 stitches, you'll place a yarn over. And that is how we create this sort of tubular effect, is by working only half those stitches at a time. So to start, we're going to start with a yarn over. And starting with a yarn over is a bit tricky. So I'm just going to tie my yarn on here. And that gives me the ability to come over, do a quick yarn over, and then knit my first stitch. And that yarn over will remain where it is. And in fact, I gave myself just a tiny tail there. And because this is the tail that you are going to weave in, I would go ahead and just make that a little bit longer. I'm not sure why I was being so chintzy. We've got lots of yarn. So just, give yourself the normal amount you would need to weave in, right? So give yourself that good, 4, 6 inches, whatever you like for your weaving in. Don't tie it really tight. We're just putting it on there loosely. It is just a placekeeper right now. It's the entire purpose of that. Okay, so now that that's on again, I'm going to come in and just do a yarn over, knit my first stitch, right? And yarn over and knit my next stitch. And then you'll just continue the whole way through. So if you're a thrower, you'd be yarning over, knitting the next stitch, and yarning over and knitting the next stitch. And what I want to show you here in a second is, especially if you get interrupted, it's always important to be able to know where you are in anything. And so when you go back to say, oh my gosh, did I do the right thing? You should always see that your stitches are pairing up, right, in little buddy sets. And then if you pull down on those buddy sets, one of the buddy is going to come directly out of the waste yarn, right? You can see almost a little knit stitch there. And the other one is just this sort of hole. So that's your knitted stitch and your yarn over. Okay. And since we started with a yarn over, we're going to end with a knit. So as you pull it apart, you can sort of see again all of your little pairs. And I do this just to make sure that I don't have a mistake, because at this point you would need to either rip or figure out how to fix that mistake. At this point, it's probably easier just to rip. So make sure that they're all there. You're going to turn your work. And now I'm not joining. I'm just going to work flat. So here's the easiest way to memorize the first row, especially. If it's a purl bump, you are going to slip it. And if it's a yarn over, you will knit it. So the joy of a high contrast waste yarn is you can very easily see where those purl bumps are. So I am a firm believer of a high contrast waste yarn. Okay, so that first stitch is a purl stitch. So I'm going to slip it with my yarn in front, and the next one is a knit, right? So the yarn comes forward to slip it purlwise, and then you knit that yarn over. Yarn comes forward to slip the stitch purlwise and knit the yarn over. Okay, let me just do that throwing here for a second. Your yarn will come forward, slip the purl, take the yarn to the back to knit. I've done so much brioche that it's like sometimes I have to remind myself, take the yarn to the back, right? And then knit. So yarn forward, slip that stitch, take the yarn to the back, and knit the stitch. So at this point with the first row done, it gets to be, your call as to whether or not you want to work one more row or go ahead and join. I do like to just work that second row because I think it's just easier to see. So if we turn our work, then we're going to work the second row just as we worked the first one, which means we will slip the purl stitches and knit the knit stitches. So slip the purls and knit the knits. Of course, bringing that yarn front, because when we slip in a tubular cast on, our goal is to always have that float sit on top of a purl bump, and that's how it gets hidden, right? And that's why you'll always float toward the purl, carry the float toward the purl bump. I think that's maybe the easiest way for me to remember how to do that. Last two stitches, so I'm going to slip the last one and knit the second to last one rather, and knit the last one. And now even easier, right? Even easier to come all the way around. And so that just sort of makes sense to me to do it that way. I'm going to go ahead and plunk my stitch marker on. And now, okay, we can see in here that our purl stitches are the ones that are carrying that little float, right? And so this time we would work our purl stitches and slip our knit stitches. So I'm going to come forward and I'm going to just purl that first stitch. Take my yarn to the back and slip the next one. So remember we said we want to take the float to the top of the purl bump. So the back side of a knit stitch is of course a purl bump. Let's see if I get you to see it. There you go. And so that's my goal, is to have that float sit right on top of that purl bump right there. Okay, so that comes there, come forward and purl. So slip with the yarn in back, so purlwise with the yarn in back, and then purl one. Slip purlwise with the yarn in back and purl one. Your hats will have quite a bit of stitches on it, so it's not going to be as hard to sort of keep the right tension on this. but this one's a little bit tight. And oftentimes on things you do, these first couple rows will be a little bit tight. Okay, so it does always occur to me that I should do at least a little bit of this throwing in case people just really want to see it that way. So I've just slipped that stitch, bring my yarn forward, purl, yarn back, slip, yarn forward, purl, right, and yarn back. It's the same thing, just sometimes it looks a little different. And then I'm going to get to my last one. Just going to switch real quick, and I'm going to slip that last stitch. Okay, then the first stitch of the next round is a purl round. We're going to do one more of these slipping every other one. So my yarn was in the back and I slipped that last stitch. My yarn is now in the front and I'm going to slip that first stitch. And that will tighten up the little line that will happen. And then some of you are going to say, what do I do about this craziness right here? Because you are going to have a little gap between those two stitches. But when we go to weave in that end, we'll be able to resolve that gap. So this time I'm going to be knitting my knits and slipping my purls. And this will be the last round of this slip one, knit one, and then we're going to go right into our ribbing. You'll also have noticed that we've been starting with a purl. So we are also going to move our marker one stitch so that we can follow our pattern and work in pattern. Okay, so I'm at the end of the row, so I'm just going to slip that last one and knit the last stitch. Now I'm going to just remove my marker, purl one stitch, put my marker back on, and now my beginning and end of round begins with a knit stitch. So from this point, now you're just going to work an actual ribbing. So I'm just going to work every stitch. So knit one, purl one, and you'll do that for, the pattern tells you, I think 12 stitches, 10, 12 stitches, or whatever height of ribbing that you like. So if you're doing the hats, you have lots and lots of yarn in that main color. If you're doing the cowls, you don't have a ton of extra, but you definitely end up with extra, even making the larger size of the cowl. And so if you wanted to work an extra 2 rows of ribbing, you would be fine to do that on both top and bottom, and assuming you're on gauge. Okay, so I just worked a couple more rounds of just the plain ribbing, just to kind of give you an idea of what that's going to look like. So the number one thing we're going to do right here is loosen this temporary half knot that we made at the beginning to hold that yarn over in place. And then we're going to, you can either just, if you didn't pull it really tight, you can just undo this right here. But if you did pull that tight, you can just come in, clip the tail, pull out a little bit, and then you find the tail again, and you're simply going to be pulling the tail out. Now, I used a little bit of a sticky yarn, which is, you know, rule number 1, don't use a sticky yarn, but it's what I had. So I used a sticky yarn. And you can see it's just pulling those stitches all the way out. Anywhere it gets stuck a little bit, just go in and help it. Pull in. Okay, and when we get that last one done, now you can just pull that yarn straight out and look at that beautiful edging that you get. And it's hard to even tell, you know, A, it's hard to tell that you started flat. I mean, who cares, right? And then B, it's even a little challenging to tell when did you transition from the knit one, slip one to the knit one, purl one. So it just gives that really, really nice edge. The other thing that I love about it is it's super, super stretchy. So it's fantastic for tops of socks, for tops of bottoms of hats. Okay, when you come in to weave in that tail, you can just sort of follow along, right? So I'm going to come in here, following that stitch, right? And then back out. We'll bring it right back into where it needs to be and straight back down there. And that's just going to pull it together. And you're going to be, you know, just fine. Take it to the back side then and weave your end in. And it's going to be pretty. It won't be an issue at all in terms of that one little stitch that was slightly separated. Okay, so that is your tubular cast on using larger needles and larger yarn just to give you a look